Hi, Peter. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Doing great. I feel like we haven't been on a webinar since last year.
It's been a long time.
It's been a long time.
Great joke.
I know. I'm at the capacity of using that joke. So I had to use it one more time, and I promise I won't do it again. Hold me accountable.
Yeah, I will. Yeah, that's enough.
Perfect. Well, people are still starting to trickle in, but I'm going to go ahead and kick us off with a fun question this morning. So Peter, I'm asking you, but I'm also asking all of our participants who are joining this morning. This question, you can go ahead and put it in the chat if you have an answer. So if you are a huge sports star and you have a walk-on song, what would your walk-on song be, Peter, and why?
I've given this some thought. I'm gonna go with the song Cyclone by Baby Bash. It was a big hit in 2009. It kind of fell off the radar after that, but I think that it's a classic hip hop 2009 bop. How about you?
That's a good one. You did sing, you and another coworker sang this for me before, so now I actually have a soundbite in my head of what that song sounds like. For me personally, and I'm also watching the chat to see if it has a perfect walk-on song. Anything Beyonce, specifically from her B-Day album, or I'm gonna have to say Summer Renaissance was also very good.
Well, but you have to pick one song, right?
Okay, I'll pick Cozy from her latest album. I love Beyonce, so it's a great one.
Right.
We've got Ken in the chat, and he said, support the grandkids, Baby Shark. Baby Shark does slap. That's a great song.
It's a banger.
Yeah, it is a banger. And then Tanya said, another one bites the dust. Yeah, that one is a classic.
Yeah, there's a really solid bass line that just, it's very good for getting pumped up.
Yes. Something that all the data we have from fun questions, the suppliers that join always have great music tastes. So I support these choices. Perfect. Well, since our participants have kind of slowly started trickling in, I'm going to go ahead and start today's content. Hello, my name is Allie, and this is Peter, and we're going to talk about SQEP Phases 2 and 3 today. So here are our faces on a slide. I'm the lead content coordinator here at SupplyPike on the SupplierWiki team, and then Peter is the second in command when it comes to content. So essentially, if you've read a webinar, an article, been to an event, if it's information for suppliers, we've probably worked on it. So I'm glad to let you lead this one today, Peter. It's going to be some great content. Perfect. Just a high-level overview about what we are covering today. We're going to talk about SQEP at a high level. And when I say SQEP, that is how we affectionately talk about Supplier Quality Excellence Program, or SQEP, here at SupplyPike. So we're going to cover that at a high level, and then we're going to dive into those phases 2 and 3 that kind of mirror each other in a lot of the same rules when it comes to barcode and labeling compliance. Then we're going to talk about the defect deep dive. So we're going to go into what those defects look like and some of the ways you can avoid and dispute them. And then lastly, we'll cover briefly disputing in high radius, which is the way that you dispute SQEP fines at Walmart. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A session with Peter and I, and then we'll show you some great things that are happening here at SupplyPike. And with that, we're going to do a couple housekeeping things. So if you're new to the webinars, you know that this is pretty standard. You can take notes, you can take screenshots of the deck, but if you signed up for this webinar, which everyone on here essentially did, then you'll get the slide deck and a video recording in your inbox in about 3 to 4 business days. And then the best way to ask a question on here, we usually get a lot of questions, especially towards the end. So if you have something that's pressing, I would go ahead and put it in the Q&A tab down at the bottom. It's 2 speech bubbles, and that's the easiest way for me to see the question and then ping it over to Peter during the Q&A portion. If it pertains to the topic we're talking about, I might sneak it in. So Peter, be ready for me to just pop up out of nowhere and ask a question. But if you have any commentary, that's best to share in the chat. So that's just a quick overview on that. And then lastly, we have our slide about SupplyPike. So if you don't know who we are, if you're just joining our webinars for the first time, hi, we're SupplyPike, and we create cloud-based tools that help CPGs reduce revenue loss. And we do that a couple different ways. We've got different products that help with OTIF disputing and root cause analysis for Walmart. We have a application called Deductions Navigator, which works across all of the retailers that we serve. So we work with Walmart, Target, Kroger, and Amazon, and we work with a lot of really cool partners, other CPG suppliers. So we would love to help you guys out with your different retail compliance issues. And with that, Peter, I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to you to talk through the SQEP content.
All right. Thank you very much, Allie, for that introduction. It was great. We'll be hearing more from you soon as questions come up. I'm so glad to hear that Ken is with us. Ken was gracious enough to do an event, a SQEP themed event with us a few months ago that was focused on preventing SQEP fines. So it's a great resource. Later on, we'll talk about our YouTube channel. You can watch the recording of his event on our YouTube channel. It's a really great resource as well. So today, maybe I'll try to emphasize a little bit more prevention as opposed to disputing. Disputing when it comes to any kind of AR deductions or chargebacks, prevention is always the best policy. If you can learn how to prevent these deductions or these chargebacks, it's a much better policy than having to go through and just kind of dispute all the time. But we'll get into that a little bit more later. Welcome, Ken. We're so glad to have you. Okay, a big matter of controversy here is SupplyPike. SQEP, SQEP, SQEP. How do you refer to it? Allie already kind of mentioned this. SQEP, I think, kind of rolls off the tongue fairly nicely, so we'll be going with that today. This, I'm sure, as all of you know, Walmart's Supplier Quality Excellence Program. This is the latest in terms of a large-scale compliance program that Walmart has put out. It's sort of paired with OTIF in the compliance regulations that Walmart has been putting out recently. So the ideal is to help suppliers become more efficient and effective in their supply chains, right? And in Walmart's supply chain. So just want to start off real quick. You guys will be getting a copy of this slide deck later. So these links should work through that later on. And these are some of the other topics that we've covered so far on SQEP as well. We've done a deep dive with SQEP Phase 1. Later on, in March, we're going to be recovering Phase 1, 2, and 3 all together. For those of you who might have missed that one, you can access it there as well. We have a SQEP 101 that we've done a number of times. So if you're a newer supplier, of Walmart, if you're not a newer supplier, but you're just now kind of figuring out about SQEP and you're trying to get it all kind of in the same place and trying to get your ducks in a row, SQEP 101 is a great resource. It might be a great training tool for new hires as well, people that you want to kind of introduce to that compliance program. We've also done a much more detailed handbook that you can download using that link as well. That is a great resource that we've been putting together over the years. And we also have an article there on Phase 1. So whenever you get this slide deck later on, you can utilize those resources as well. Also, going to supplierwiki.supplypike.com, we have a number of resources that suppliers can find helpful for training purposes, educational purposes, or any number of things. And I can get into that a little bit more later as well. Starting off here, we always like to cover this slide. This is a very important kind of fundamental principle of being a Walmart supplier. What is the difference between deductions, OTIF fines, and SQEP fines? On the one hand, there are AP deductions, which are a little bit more standard and more common. These are the deductions that come right off of the check. This is what APDP is for, and APIS. These are apps that are surrounding that policy. Invalid deductions can be disputed and won with the right documentation through that process, right? And APDP is the way that you go through that process of disputing. OTIF fines are older than SQEP fines. The OTIF program was released in 2017. And we won't be covering that today, but we have a lot of resources on that subject as well, if that's something that your business is struggling with. Very similar to SQEP in terms of it's about compliance. It's about being on time and in full. But these are AR charges that come from Walmart in the form of fines to the supplier. They're not shortage deductions, right? So these all stack on top of each other. One supplier error or perceived error from Walmart's perspective could be hit with a deduction, an OTIF fine, and a SQEP fine. OTIF disputes are informal, and there is a kind of the process for disputing OTIF and SQEP. These are younger processes, if that makes sense. So these are processes that we're still developing kind of as we go. It can be done through high radius or with your buyer, depending on your relationship with your buyer. Something that we'll be talking about a lot today is that relationship between the buyer and the supplier. It's so key for talking about compliance issues. So if you can foster and develop that kind of relationship with your buyer, I think that's ideal. But we always recommend caution with that as well. You don't want to jeopardize your relationship with your buyer just to kind of win some quick money back, right? So that is a kind of a case-by-case basis. We've talked a little bit about how do you do that? How do you explore? How do you talk with the Walmart team in a variety of ways? We've done a webinar on that subject as well, so it may be worth checking out too. For SQEP fines, these invoices will be deducted for each defect. SQEP fines are packaging compliance fines, and multiple SQEP fines can stack on each other and other fines or deductions. As with OTIF, these are disputed in high radius, but your relationship with your buyer is kind of important to that process as well. So SQEP is much more about packaging, labeling, and barcodes. We'll be getting into some of the details of that with this webinar as well. Okay, so what is SQEP? It was introduced February 1st of 2021. So we're coming up on the 2-year birthday of SQEP. Celebrate by getting ahead of it, if you will. It was designed to encourage a zero-based mindset with regard to quality defects. And they really mean that. They really mean that their goal is 100%. And I think that's the next slide as well. This includes, but is not limited to, PO accuracy. That's what SQEP Phase 1 is all about. Barcode and labeling, which is SQEP Phase 2. Packaging, load, and pallet quality, which is Phase 3. And we'll be talking about the latter two today. SQEP Phase 4 is still on the horizon. We're not totally sure when that's coming. Okay, so this is SQEP's ambitious goal, to bring Walmart to a 100% defect-free orders with matching invoices from its suppliers. So this is ambitious, right? Supply chains are kind of the talk of the town right now in the business world. It's everyone's kind of focusing on that, especially in retail. And Walmart is really trying to lead the way. They're really trying to be perfect. And so this is, it's ambitious and it's possible with the right amount of foresight and insight. So who is subject to SQEP regulations? All suppliers of Walmart who are shipping to DCs in the continental US. And that includes fulfillment centers as well. Suppliers for e-commerce, Walmart.com, all direct import suppliers, Little side note, OTIF does not apply to direct import, but SQEP does, with the exception of the ASN requirements. So that's a little kind of important little caveat when we're talking about general compliance stuff. It also applies to DSDCs, direct store delivery, consolidation. Now, there are some exceptions. Sam's Club suppliers do not have SQEP. I believe they have a similar kind of version of it. So it doesn't mean that you're kind of free from all compliance regulations if you're a Sam's Club supplier, but it's a different program. It's not the exact same program. Suppliers of Walmart Canada and Mexico, anyone shipping to Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and Alaska DCs, D99 and D96 suppliers. That's more kind of like in-store supplies and cleaning stuff. And DSDs, direct store delivery, and drop ship vendors are also exempt from SQEP. Okay, so here's our timeline that we've been working with. I'll get into phase 4 a little bit more here as well. So there was a 1A as well. I think it was, if I remember correctly, it was more of a kind of a trial period for about a month. I can't remember the specific emphasis in that one, but it was kind of the beginning of rolling it out. A sort of not a trial period, but just a shorter period at the very beginning. Phase 1B is focused on PO accuracy. And that rolled out Q1 of fiscal year end 2022. Phase 1C was about ASNs. And again, for more about that, we have our SQEP phase 1 deep dive. We really dig into the ASN kind of issue. ASN's not downloaded is a perennial issue for suppliers of Walmart. So if you have more questions about that, please go visit that resource. It should be really helpful for you guys there. Phase 2, we'll be talking about today, barcode and labeling compliance. We'll be getting into some of the nitty-gritty there. Phase 3, packaging, pallet, and load compliance, a little bit more of the actual physical kind of process of shipping and supplying. And phase 4, we're still not sure when it's coming. So if you have if you've heard any whispers, any kind of rumors about when we can expect phase 4 to drop, we'd heard some kind of faulty information that November of last year might be when it comes, and it just never did. So, so scheduling and transportation, whenever phase 4 is coming, we will let you know. We will be right on the cusp of that. But if you've heard anything, we'd love for you to share that with everyone as well. So yes, probably sometime soon is our best guess for that. Okay, so these are the 3 most important retail link apps for SQEP generally. Fix-It, we'll be getting into that quite a bit today. We'll be talking a little bit about Fix-It. That's where you can access photographs of the individual defects. Fix-It's super important for viewing, tracking, and correcting defects concerning phases 2 and 3. So I don't believe that Fix-It applies at all to phase 1 of SQEP, but if it does, or if you've ever had to use it for phase 1, let us know as well. I think that's phase 1 is dealt with entirely in different apps, and in the SQEP scorecard and in High Radius. SQEP scorecard is essential to tracking your performance. Right now, this will let you know which SQEP defect you have been hit with the hardest. You should be able to kind of locate these errors and clean up your supply chain through that process. So we got a question that was an early submitted question about how do I locate the kind of the repeat problem areas in my supplier performance. The SQEP scorecard will be very helpful for that. That's how you figure out, okay, is it always ASNs not downloaded that I'm getting hit with? Or is it barcode compliance that we've really been struggling with? Whatever it is, here's the main thing to kind of focus on. That's Walmart trying to communicate to you, hey, here's the problem, try to get it fixed, and move on from there to the next thing, right? High Radius is the app that Walmart uses for filing and dealing with disputes for SQEP. So it's a third-party app, and that's how we go through the dispute process for this. And we'll cover that a little bit towards the end of today as well. But again, our emphasis can always be on prevention over disputing. You don't want to have to hire whole teams for your business to go through and keep disputing fines if what you can do ahead of time is kind of eliminate the problem altogether, right? And ideally, the human error, at least on your part, can be avoided, right? Human error on Walmart's part is a different issue, and that's why high radius exists. That's why disputing exists, and that's why we're all here today to talk about it too. So, yeah, take all of that with a grain of salt too. Okay, the Fix-It portal. This is going to be really important to talk about today. Phase 2 and 3 defects are reported to suppliers through this portal. So you can see the individual defect, you can click on it, and you can look at some of the photos that are attached to it too. So if it's always a pallet issue that you're having, someone will be taking photos of those and uploading them to Fix-It. And you can get a sense of, okay, are these falling apart? Have they not met regular kind of regulations, etc. In this portal, Walmart also collects corrective action from its suppliers based on the kind of packaging error reported, right? So this is Walmart saying, hey, here's this recurring issue that we're seeing. What are you going to do to change it, right? That's what they're asking for with corrective action. Again, it's not always the supplier's fault. It's not always a human error on the supplier side. Sometimes we've heard a lot of different stories about the kinds of some mistakes sometimes Walmart will make with the Fix-It app, right? So just being aware of that and being attuned to it, knowing whenever it is an actual supplier error is obviously key, right? And that's kind of the first step. Sometimes Walmart is asking for corrective action, and really it's an error more on their part than on the supplier side. So kind of being aware of that is really important too. And as I mentioned already, you click on an individual ticket, that'll give you access to the photos taken at the DC that pertain to that particular error. So those are great. Sometimes the quality isn't quite as much. You can download those onto your computer and file them away for later stuff as well. Those can be very useful for understanding what the error is, where, who's responsible, etc. Right. And I think just for more visual people like myself, it's helpful to just see it. Sometimes you can get lost in the numbers and in the graphs and the data, right? It's helpful to kind of just see, okay, from the DC's perspective, this is how it arrived, right? And here's what they're struggling with. So that can be helpful as well. Here's the interface. It should look familiar to a lot of you. You've got your individual defects listed there. Got the category, right? So you can separate out phase 2 and 3 through there. You got the date, obviously, delivery, PO, item. These are super important for disputing if it comes to that, as well as the ticket ID. Okay, so these statuses are pretty self-explanatory as well, but it's helpful to go through just so that there's perfect clarity throughout this whole kind of process. So awaiting corrective action will be the first one. The ticket has been submitted to the supplier and it is awaiting corrective action. So obviously the assigned group is the supplier. The burden of proof is on you now to make some corrective action. Supplier reviews the ticket and provides corrective action or links ticket to existing action, right? We've already taken action on this particular issue. This is a one-off, or this is just a kind of, human error thing that we've already taken this specific action to try to avoid. If additional details are needed, add comments and assign to Walmart, right? So corrective action submitted, that's the second part. Now it's the ball is in Walmart's court, as well as with need clarification, right? Why would you ever need clarification? Everything's always perfectly explained. Wrong. No, sometimes you need more information. So that's what that status is there to kind of signify. Walmart, we need more details, right? We need better information. These pictures aren't helpful, etc. Clarification provided, Walmart has responded to the additional information request from the supplier. Now the burden of proof is back on the supplier. Supplier reviews response provided by Walmart and provides corrective action or links to an existing action again, right? And then close. The ticket does not meet the threshold required for corrective action, right? Maybe this was a one-off. Maybe it has been determined that it was Walmart's fault. And so they've kind of tried to resolve it that way. Okay. This portal is useful for understanding which phase 2 and 3 compliance issues are recurrent for suppliers. Again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but it's very important for that. You can't dispute in fix it. We've covered this already. That's what high radius is for. So we'll be getting into that in a little bit, but a little bit of review there that can be pretty helpful. As with all kind of Walmart supply issues, you're going to have to use a lot of apps. You're going to have to be in a lot of different places, and they're all in retail link, which is another issue in and of itself. But let's get into phase 2 here. Right item, right condition. That's the ideal kind of goal for phase 2. It addresses barcode and labeling defects that make it difficult or impossible to identify, label, and receive cases flowing through the network. And the two main kind of areas, right? Barcode compliance and labeling compliance. Barcode compliance is about the ability to receive cases based off of the scanned barcode, obviously. Labeling compliance is about adhering to Walmart's guidelines around carton label identification and carton markings. One way that we've described this difference in the past, barcode compliance is more about the computer side of things. It's more about the automation side of things. Labeling compliance is more about the human kind of component, how humans actually receive the shipments, if that makes sense. So Walmart's secondary packaging supply chain standards, we're going to be referring to this throughout the rest of the webinar and pinpointing certain page locations for you to read about and engage with for these specific things, right? So these are the defect descriptions that come from this source. You can, so this is linked to it in the slide deck that you'll get later on. But if you just Google Walmart secondary packaging supply chain standards, there should be a PDF that shows up first. And I believe that PDF is the most updated form of the document as well. That should have all of the information that you need there too. So if you need it right away, just go ahead and Google it. So there are defect descriptions for barcode compliance. These can get a little tricky. These are a little kind of like legalese, right? It's about protecting Walmart in case of, so that they could apply these to as broad of a range of potential issues as possible, right? Wrong format, incorrect quantity, incorrect barcode, or other barcode defects. Those are for the barcode. And for label compliance, incorrect quantity, missing incorrect description, item number or vendor stock number, or other labeling defects. And this one, hopefully, hazmat compliance. Hopefully you're aware of this, and there aren't too many mistakes with that as well. If you're dealing with a potentially dangerous substance, right? I'm sure that you have gone through all that as well. Okay, so the way that SQEP 2 charges work is that there is a $200 admin fee per defect, plus a $1 per case impacted for the inspection data source. Okay, and then under automation, there's a $1 per impacted impacted fee as well. These are the two ways that Walmart, the two data sources that Walmart uses to keep SQEP compliance in check. Inspection data, right? So these are accumulated from random manual audits. They will occasionally go in and check 10 cases and see how many of those are compliant. And then automation data accumulated from vision technology when available, right? And again, it's likely as things continue to change that automation data will kind of become more important. Because it's just a more accurate way of measuring compliance. So here's an example of a SQEP phase 2 charge. The inspection example is 12 cases were inspected and 3 had defects. Okay, so very simply, 75% of your cases are compliant. 3 out of 12 are not. So the defects per million is then 250, right? 1,000. So pretty straightforward, right? I don't know why they like to measure in defects per million. Maybe it's just helpful for the large scale of understanding, but watch those defects per million. That'll be a good kind of indicator of where you are. Okay, so this is another example. You have a flat fine for every defect, $200 plus 3 impacted cases times $1, which is the charge multiplied by the number of cases affected, right? And as always, there can be multiple defects per PO. Okay, so in the case of an automation example, right, if there are 200 cases and there's 2 items per every 100 cases each that were inspected and had 100 defects, right, you are 50% compliant, pretty straightforward, and the defects per million is then 500,000. Okay, it's a little bit more of the same kind of review. There is no flat line for automation, right? Because it's automated. So there isn't someone who's having to go in and kind of check these things. There's 100 impacted cases, the charge that's multiplied by the number of cases affected again. And as always, there can be multiple defects per PO. So those can really add up. And again, automation, in my view, this is just me speaking, not an official Walmart kind of statement, but I see automation becoming more important. Every retailer is interested in making sure that they can squeeze every little last bit of accuracy out of the way that they do compliance. So as automation becomes more important, those numbers will become more accurate. But that's just me. So take all that with a grain of salt. All right, phase 3, talked about already, introduced a little bit already, is about packaging, pallet, and load compliance. Okay, right condition, that's the ideal goal, phase 3. This addresses packaging, pallet, and load defects that make it difficult or impossible for product to flow efficiently and without damage from suppliers to stores. Right? It's a little bit obvious, a little bit review, but the language there is really important too. Packaging compliance is about the carton's ability to endure the handling and processing throughout the supply chain, right? So how good are how quality are the containers that you're using to move your freight? Pallet compliance, adherence to pallet labeling, securement, and required quality standards, right? How much shrink wrap are you using? Is it enough to keep everything on the pallet, et cetera? Load quality compliance, adherence to load stability and segregation standards. So again, we can see how these are pretty specific, right? But they still touch on a lot of other compliance and a lot of other potential deductions, right? It's all connected. Okay, so we're back in the secondary packaging supply chain standards document. This comes from there. Packaging compliance defects are weak packaging glue tape, right? Poor perforations, missing tray, lid, loose wrap, undersized / oversized case, selling units not secured or other packaging defects. With the pallet labeling, right? Missing shipping label or other pallet labeling defects, right? Talk about a broad definition there. Other pallet labeling defects. That's a catch-all. That's a catch-all for any kind of anything that is not ideal according to Walmart's vision of that, right? Again, this is legalese. This is designed to be able to protect them financially from anything not going exactly according to plan. When it comes to pallet securement, their language is poor securement, bagged item, missing tray, or other pallet securement defects. Again, you've got that catch-all there. So yeah, watch out for that. Okay, there's a few more of these here. When it comes to pallet build, pallet overhang, excessive height, or other pallet build defects. Again, with that catch-all. Non-compliant, when it comes to pallet quality, non-compliant with grade A standards, non-compliant size, or other pallet quality defects. I believe we've mentioned before in the past, there's 2 pallet companies that Walmart uses. I don't know what their names are, but that's something that we could get to you guys a little bit later on as well. Those should all be compliant and the right size. Load stability, shifted, unstable, not palletized, or other load stability defects. Hopefully none of you have seen any kind of really disastrous pictures in Fix-It of the boxes all over the back of the truck, or the shrink wrap couldn't hold it. And so it was, that's what they're talking about there. Load segregation, segregation by PO type, PO item, or other load segregation defects, again, with the catch-all. Okay, so let's get into a phase 3 SQEP charge example. So for pallet compliance example, if 9 pallets were inspected and 3 had defects, right, you're at 2/3 compliant, right? So you're 66% compliant, and the defects per million is 333,333, obviously. Okay, so you got 3 impacted POs times a $200 charge, a charge multiplied by the number of affected POs, plus a charge multiplied by the number of pallets affected, right? So if there's 3 impacted pallets, what you're looking at there is $612. Again, there can be multiple defects per PO, so watch out for that. All right. We're going to go into some defect deep dives here really quick. Defect deep dive for phase 2. This is a very common one, label compliance. It is most important to make sure that labels are added to boxes in the locations specified by Walmart. Okay. That's super important. New suppliers sometimes miss that, or sometimes don't have it exactly right. Walmart also recommends that newer suppliers send a sample shipping label and SCC 14 barcode for review in order to minimize miscommunication, right? So you've got a whole process for that as well for newer suppliers. Again, Walmart's supplier packaging and labeling compliance manual is the Bible for all of this. So that's where you'll be able to find all of those answers. How to avoid label compliance defects. These are just general SQEP good practices, so this will apply to everything, but clear communication with your buyer team. You know, if your buyer team is unhappy and or you're unhappy, right? If you guys are able to communicate that to each other well and clearly, then that's ideal. Also, staying up to date with Walmart updates, obviously, is really important because it's an ever-changing world out there. Okay. A little bit more here. If you go to retail link and then in the academy, the links at the bottom of the page have a lot of helpful information for all things that are supplier related, of course. And then for more specific pages within Walmart's secondary packaging supply chain standards, we've got these listed out here. So especially pages 204 through 211, that's super important for label compliance. So check that out. Other pages related to labeling compliance generally that should be read as well are those listed there. And then for more product specific labeling questions and standards, see those pages there as well. So labeling is a big one because it covers a lot of different areas. You have the general training and then you have product specific stuff and everything kind of in between. So it's a lot of reading. Pour yourself a big cup of coffee and knock it out. Okay, so let's move on to barcode compliance. This is still phase 2, right? Very common defect. It's always the result of incongruity between the barcode and what is inside the case, right? At least in the ideal. These are the common subcategories that we've kind of touched on briefly already. Incorrect quantity, obviously, right? And again, you can see how this is connected to, for example, AP deductions with shortages, right? If there is an incorrect quantity that is a shortage, you can be slapped with 2 fines or 3. Incorrect barcode, wrong format, or missing barcode. That is not ideal. So how do you avoid this? Again, see the pages related to this, 183 through 240, but especially pages 200 through 204. Those are the real kind of meat of it. Clear communication with packaging teams and or 3PLs is obviously super important if you are prepaid. Okay, let's move on to phase 3, packaging compliance. Obviously, this is what we're here to tell you, is the information that you already know. Using sturdy and reliable packaging is the best way to avoid that. And again, communicating with your team so that they know exactly what those what is enough, right? What is enough to make sure that the packaging is secure. Studying Walmart's description of this defect will give suppliers a better sense of the particular defects most common under this bucket. Absolutely. Spend some time in the Fix-It app, look at the pictures that are uploaded there. What are the common defects? What's commonly happening, right? Is it the shrink wrap that's not enough? Is it the boxes themselves, et cetera? So the pages that will be most relevant for this one in the Supply Chain Standards Manual, 234 through 240, but most of the rest of 182 through 350 will be relevant as well. I know that's a bummer. That's a ton of reading, but it has to be done. It has to be read. Calculate which packaging materials and teams are most reliable, right? Use reliable and sturdy packaging materials and methods, obviously. Weak packaging and weak lack of glue/tape are common tags on these defects. So again, it comes down to the materials, maybe it comes down to the teams. It's a lot to monitor, but it will pay off in the long run. Okay, let's move on to the final portion. As I've been kind of harping on quite a bit today, right? Prevention is the best method, but sometimes Walmart is wrong. Sometimes they make mistakes on their end as well. Contrary to popular belief, Walmart does make mistakes sometimes. So we're going to cover some of the basics of how to go through this disputing process in high radius as well. How can you dispute through high radius to be as successful as possible? Well, you'll need the PO number, obviously, the item number, defect type, DC number, and number of cases impacted. This is really kind of essential information so that you can pinpoint it exactly, so there can be no miscommunication. Okay, so when it comes to packaging related fines, make sure that you view the images and fix it, right? Again, have these downloaded, have them filed away, and filed away in a way that can be accessible to find them later on as well. That is essential to that. This will help you get a better sense of what particularly you are being fined for. I'm glad that Ken is here as well to kind of attest to this as well. Sometimes human error on the Walmart side could result in them not assigning the right fines to the right people and the right businesses. So communicating through the Fix-It app in the question in the chat there on the bottom right of the Fix-It display can be essential for making sure that it is the right product. Even sometimes sometimes Walmart's errors can result in bigger miscommunications. Okay, so here's your high radius display, right? Hopefully you're familiar with this. Quick disclaimer before we get into it in too much detail. Open and closed bills, right? Bills that have not been paid off or matched with the transactions are open bills. After those have matched, they are closed. But you can dispute both open and closed bills. So that can be a little bit misleading. Closed bills don't mean that you can't dispute them. Okay, so that's important to kind of mention before moving on. Select the charge that you would like to dispute by clicking the box. You can select more than one. You can select all of them, we like to say, right? So you can start there with that process. Fill in the required information, right? Right here, we have dispute reason, amount to be disputed, comments if applicable. We highly recommend, right? What is specifically going on here? Over communicate rather than under communicate. and then attach the relevant documents, maybe a picture from the Fix-It app, or something along those lines as well. Okay, and for good measure, make sure that you save your work. After you've populated all of the necessary boxes, click Save in the bottom right corner, and your dispute will be filed. At that point, then you can follow up on it under the Disputes tab, right? So, and there you can track its progress, track its process. Okay, so here's a little bit of customer service information with regard to high radius generally. Now, how helpful are these avenues? Maybe a little bit, maybe sometimes more helpful than others. So again, take it all with a grain of salt. HighRadCS@Walmart.com. We do know that if you don't have a high radius account and you need to get that set up, that's the way that you do that. You do that through that email. So that's how you get your login information for high radius. And also any kind of general customer service questions can go through that email as well. Again, mixed results. Could be more helpful in some instances than others. This is the phone number that we have for, the Supplier Contact Center. And there's a link there for customer help as well. I believe that's where you can kind of file a question and give some more information there. As I mentioned already, the chat section in the Fix-It app can be really helpful too. Ken mentioned in our last talk about it from his experience. You get one really good question right at the beginning. The first question that you ask is likely to get a response. So make sure that first question is really a good one. You don't want to have to add a bunch of follow-up questions onto it later. Those might not be responded to quite as quickly or quite as effectively, if that makes sense. So that's another way of communicating with Walmart through this process. And as always, we love to remind you guys of this. Just because you dispute something through SQEP and high radius doesn't mean that the equivalent OTIF fine will be disputed as well or overturned as well. So all of these are kind of separate teams, and they don't communicate clearly with each other. So you have to deal with, if you remember from that slide at the beginning, we've got AP deductions, we've got OTIF fines, we've got SQEP fines. Those are three separate ways of keeping suppliers compliant. If you want to dispute AP deductions, it has to be done there through the APDP, right? If you want to dispute OTIF fines, you have to do it with your buyer through high radius, and that's a separate entity from SQEP as well. So keep all that in mind. It can really pile up, and it can be tricky to deal with through that as well. Successfully disputed SQEP fines and high radius do not count as a successful dispute for the same errors equivalent fine in OTIF. Okay, as a way of kind of summarizing that. Alrighty, I think we've got some time for questions here. If we have some, looks like we do.
Yes, we do. First one I wanted to call out was in the chat. Will Supply Pike have something similar to OTIF Radar for SQEP?
Yes, in the future, we will have a SQEP product that we're all very excited about, and we've been talking about a little bit as well. I don't know the timeline on that. That's a better question for someone in product or for a customer service representative, if you have one already for OTIF Radar. We're not sure about the timeline, but I do believe that a SQEP product is in the works and it will be released soon.
Oh, very cool. Awesome. Another question. How do we determine what is wrong with a barcode? Is it the actual barcode? Is it not enough GTIN barcodes on the box? All Walmart states is barcode quantity. anything to throw at the wall there, Peter, because I know that this issue is something we talk a lot with suppliers.
Yeah, no, I would, it's not something that I could say, according to my knowledge. Again, Allie, you may have a little bit more information that you'd like to share. This is usually what they mean by that. I would recommend just putting that in the fix-it chat for those defects. Asking that clarifying question there. Again, you'll probably get one good shot. You'll probably get one pretty good response per defect. So maybe doing that a few times. If you keep getting the same response, maybe try that a few times with each of the defects and see how that goes. But that's my only recommendation there, without knowing more about the individual case. Yeah.
Yeah, I would also say reading that really fun large document I shared in the chat, the supplier packaging quality standards. Peter, you included some of the numbers, the page numbers, and so reviewing that, reviewing your fix-it log, seeing, the common chain through that is. If you can ask other suppliers what works for them or other issues they've had, I think that that's especially helpful. But I know that this is kind of a convoluted process. And if you have any specific questions, we would love to help with those. We'll put our emails up here towards the end. But the barcode issue is something that's pretty perpetual for a lot of suppliers.
Yeah, just to review, I think pages 183 through 240 is the general barcode stuff there. And then 200 through 204 is the kind of more of the meat that might be more relevant there. So reviewing that could be helpful, might not.
Yes, and the PDF pages don't line up with those. So if you just type in those numbers, if you click like Command Find in the document, you'll be able to find those page numbers easier, because the document page numbers and the actual page numbers on the document don't line up, which is really fun when you're trying to search through it.
It's a great point. So the page numbers on this webinar apply to the actual page numbers on Walmart's, and I think it's their top right and top left corners, but it's not the actual PDF pages. Thank you, Allie, for reminding us of that.
Yeah, and Ken, who we've worked with on SQEP stuff, I'll have the link for the event we did with him. He also mentioned from his wisdom of working it through SQEP fines, barcode quantity usually means the carton requires 2 barcodes with at least 1 on the longest side. Wrong quantity means either 1 or 0 barcodes. That's his experience, and I'm really glad that we have suppliers who are willing to share what they've learned, because I know it can be a tedious process.
Yes, thank you.
Other questions? I'll go ahead and I'll take this one, Peter, and then I'll let you kind of plug in some things. Do you do one-on-one training for helping assess labels, barcodes, etc., to help a vendor with fines, chargebacks, etc.? Yes, is the short answer. So SupplierWiki will, if you have our emails and you email us, we'll answer any question that you have. I will say that if you are a customer or a client of ours, you do get a little bit more of reinforcement. So you get training on our applications, our products that we have, but as well as a customer support team that will answer any question you have when it comes to OTIF, deductions, SQEP fines. So for more of a one-on-one training, that's kind of a benefit of working with us and using our products. Anything to add there, Peter?
None at all. You really knocked it out of the park, Allie.
Wow, thank you.
No.
All right, let's see if we have another question. Let's see. This guest went to the Fix-It app via retail link, and they have 7 tickets listed, and it shows barcode compliance. If you want to know more about this barcode compliance, where would be the best place to go? Contact from Walmart, a way to know those defects. What are some of those resources, Peter?
Yep. Same thing. I'd like to return to this slide again. I think this is where you'd find some of the most helpful information, pages 200 through 204 of that document. But yeah, aside from that, Ken talks a lot about barcode compliance in his event that he did with us. That could be a helpful watch as well. It's about an hour long. talk. It's a great talk. It's really entertaining. Ken has a lot of good jokes. And so he makes it interesting and engaging as well. So I think Allie's going to post that in the chat here in a bit too. That could be helpful. But yeah, aside from that, I would recommend you get that one good question in the Fix-It app too.
I would also say that if you're on Retail Link and you go to Supplier Academy and you find this SQEP learning page, they update it pretty irregularly, but there are contact numbers on there. And then I'll also plug the Walmart Supplier Support group on Facebook, because these programs change regularly, but sometimes we're not certain of what those changes are. I would go ahead and also use the Supplier Contact Center. Thank you for putting that page up. Sometimes the high radius can be helpful if it's about a dispute, but really if you're trying to get more of a root cause analysis, I would look at Supplier Support Group too. That's a great resource, or the any information on the SQEP learning page on Supplier Academy. And then we also have lots of resources that kind of boil down all of that information into a little bit of a easier and more concise read. And I've posted those in the chat, and they'll also be linked in this deck. So perfect. Let's see if we have some more questions and if we have time. Looks like we have time for about one more question. I'm getting a lot of questions, and I was kind of working on this behind the scenes while you were walking through the content about overages. And there seems to be an issue with overages, talking about AP deductions, but also SQEP fines. So one thing I do want to call out is that these can kind of layer over each other. So if you're seeing one in one area, like a SQEP fine with overages, then I would go ahead and look at your AP deductions in APDP or look at APIS. We've got content on that, because I have a hunch that there might be some overlap, or if not, it will be coming. In terms of overages, we haven't worked a ton with other customers on these particular issues regarding SQEP fines. I do know a relatively large supplier that we've worked with who was continuously getting overages in their SQEP fines. And I believe it was to PO accuracy. So they were saying, hey, your POs aren't accurate. This is going to be a SQEP phase 1 charge. And actually the way that this particular supplier that we work with was able to dispute this and win their dispute was pulling their PO, seeing that they were being charged for an overage and assessing the amount of space they had in the truck. And again, they pay for the whole truck. Their whole truck is theirs. So they actually were able to say, hey, we only carry this much X amount of product in each truck, and you're saying that it's over. It literally would not fit in this truck. So there's some creative ways to kind of play with this. If you want to look into pulling like an analysis of the amount of product you have in a truck, or we can also share some of the other ways that people have worked through this. I'm seeing kind of a trend. So maybe this is something that we can pull in and do a little bit of more of a defect deep dive and more SQEP webinars, but that's kind of the experience we've had when working with the suppliers who have won resolutions on like an overage charge with SQEP.
I like that shout out too of trying to use the AP tools as a way of learning more about the same or the equivalent fine for compliance. Yeah.
If you can pull another tip, if you can pull it being Walmart data, and not maybe, your 3PL or data that is only accessible on your end, you're going to have a higher chance of proving it because they like to see their own data. So perfect. Well, I think we only have 1 minute of time. I know we had a lot of questions we didn't get to, but Peter and I will take these and we will sprinkle them into the content and try to get back to you on some of these questions. We have lots of SQEP content coming up this year, but I did want to plug our in-person event. It is about disputing Walmart AP deductions. So if you or your company, your team has been on settlement and that's how you've been handling your AP deductions with Walmart, we're going to talk about what coming off settlement means, how to use the AP deduction tools with Walmart, and just reframing the problem for suppliers so you have a better understanding of how to restructure your teams, how to train your teams for dealing with Walmart AP deductions, how to individually dispute, and then we'll also be talking a little bit about our solution as well. So join us in person, the Supplier Hall of Fame, if you're in the Northwest Arkansas area. If not, we have heard your responses. We're going to try to live stream this. I believe we've got that confirmed. So we'll be at least having a recording of this, but we are going to live stream as well. So we hope to see you there, whether it's in person or online. And then the last thing I wanted to call out was we're on YouTube. So we had a couple people who were not aware that Supply Pike has a YouTube channel. And we've got lots of great resources. It's got our recordings of webinars, how to avoid SQEP fines workshop with Ken that we've referred to several times during this webinar. And then lots of others like the Walmart discontinues settlement disputing. And with that, thank you so much, Peter, for walking through the great content. Here are our emails. Thank you so much for all your questions. We're going to go ahead and plug those into our research. If you want to talk further, go ahead and jot our emails down, email us your question, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. Peter, anything else before we say goodbye?
Nope. No, I think that's all.
Perfect. Well, thank you all for joining us. We appreciate it, and have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Bye all.